You are holding a $1,299 phone, and somewhere in the factory that built it, an undercover investigator just spent 6 months documenting conditions that violate Chinese law, published the day before Apple's keynote, in a report the brand hopes you scroll past. They assembled the hardware, polished the story, raised the price every September, and counted on the logo doing the rest. Today, we are reading the factory receipts, and by the end of this video, you will never look at that phone the same way again. Let's start with the number Apple will never put on stage, the factory that builds for everyone. Picture the most controlled retail environment you have ever walked into. White surfaces, precise lighting, products arranged like sculpture. The Apple Store exists to communicate one thing: that Apple is singular. A company unlike any other, making products unlike anything else. Now picture the factory that actually builds those products. In Zhengzhou, China, there is a complex so enormous it has its own fire station, its own hospital, and its own bank. The locals call it iPhone City, 200,000 workers at peak season, and it is owned and operated by Foxconn, a Taiwanese manufacturer that simultaneously builds the Google Pixel, the PlayStation 5, and various Microsoft devices. The two phones Apple and Google spend hundreds of millions marketing against each other are built in the same complex by the same company on neighboring production lines. But Foxconn is just the assembly layer. Go deeper and it gets more interesting. The display in your iPhone 17 Pro Max? Made by Samsung Display or LG, the same companies supplying the Galaxy S25 Ultra, the phone Apple benchmarks against at its own keynotes. The A19 Pro chip designed in California, manufactured by TSMC in Taiwan, the same foundry making chips for Qualcomm, which powers essentially every major Android device. The camera sensor is Sony, the memory is SK Hynix, the glass is Corning. Every one of these component suppliers works with Apple's direct competitors. So when Apple shows you a phone on a dark stage with dramatic music and tells you nothing else comes close, they are talking about the software, the chip architecture, and the design, all of which are genuinely impressive. But the factory, the hands, the components, those are shared with the rest of the industry. You are paying for a story wrapped around a supply chain that Apple and its competitors both use. The drama is real. The exclusivity is not. Here is the question worth asking. If the display is Samsung's, the sensor is Sony's, the memory is SK Hynix's, and the assembly is Foxconn's, what did Apple make? The answer is the chip, the software, and the logo. And one of those three things costs $408. The logo costs the other $891. The report published the day before the keynote. On September 25th, 2025, one day before Apple took the stage to announce the iPhone 17, China Labor Watch published an investigative report. They had spent 6 months sending undercover investigators into Foxconn's Zhengzhou facility, the world's largest iPhone factory. More than 100 interviews with workers. One investigator employed there for 4 years straight. The findings were specific, documented, and immediately confirmed in key points by Foxconn itself. Here is what they found. Dispatch workers, temporary staff hired through third-party agencies who receive no sick leave, no paid vacation, no social insurance, made up more than 50% of the workforce during iPhone 17 production. Chinese law caps dispatch workers at 10% of a company's workforce. Foxconn was running 5 times the legal limit. Apple's own supplier code of conduct prohibits it. Both companies confirmed the violation after the report dropped. The pay structure was engineered to trap workers in the factory during peak season. Hourly wages were split into 2 installments, a base portion paid monthly, and a second portion held until the following month. If a worker resigned before the 25th of a month, the second portion, effectively covering 45 to 50 days of work, was forfeited. Workers were clocking 60 to 75 hours per week, well above China's legal maximum and above Apple's own stated 60-hour cap. Student workers earning 12 RMB per hour, roughly $1.65, were placed on night shifts and forced overtime, in some cases linked to graduation requirements. There is also a detail in this report that, once you read it, you cannot unfocus on. Investigators documented the presence of Apple employees inside the Foxconn facility during the investigation period. Apple representatives were on site. Apple saw what was happening. Apple's response when the report published: teams are on site and have begun an immediate investigation into conditions their own people had been watching for months. Apple's official statement: we are firmly committed to the highest standards of labor, human rights, environmental, and ethical conduct. That sentence has appeared in Apple press releases about Foxconn labor violations in 2017, 2019, 2022, and 2025. Word for word, committed to the highest standards, every time. While the conditions documented by independent investigators changed very little. This is the factory that built your iPhone 17. This is what happened inside it while Apple was rehearsing the keynote that would tell you this changes everything. Designed in California, 6 words worth $891. On the back of every iPhone designed by Apple in California, 6 words. The most profitable 6 words ever printed on a consumer product. Here is their legal meaning. Apple designed the product, the form factor, the chip, the software. That is what California refers to. There is no regulation specifying what percentage of the iPhone must be manufactured in America. The FTC's Made in USA standard requires that all or virtually all of the product is domestic. Apple does not claim that. They claim design. The manufacturing, the components, the assembly, thus disclosed in the second line, assembled in China, which most buyers skip. This is structurally identical to what the Swiss watch industry does with the Swiss-made label. Switzerland requires that 60% of manufacturing costs come from Switzerland, which sounds strict until you realize that expensive Swiss labor tips the cost calculation even when 40% of physical components are foreign. Apple's designed in California is even simpler. It requires nothing from the manufacturing side. It is a pure concept origin claim. The phone was imagined in California. Everything else happened in Zhengzhou. Now layer in the margin. Apple's gross margin hit a record 46.9% in fiscal 2025. On services, the App Store, iCloud, Apple Music, Apple Care, the margin is 75.7%. 3/4 of every dollar from your subscriptions goes to profit. The iPhone is the door, the subscriptions are the room. And in fiscal 2025, services became a $100 billion annual business. Apple generated $416 billion in total revenue and $93 billion in net income in a single year, while iPhone unit sales were essentially flat. Because once you have 2.2 billion active Apple devices in the world, you do not need to sell more devices. You need each device to generate more subscription revenue. Designed in California, monetized everywhere. The update that slowed your phone, and the settlement you probably never received. In December 2017, a developer named John Poole was running benchmark tests on his iPhone 6s and noticed something strange. The performance scores were inconsistent. Not slightly inconsistent, but wildly variable in a pattern that only made sense if the processor was being deliberately throttled on some runs. He published his findings, the internet noticed, and then Apple confirmed it. Starting with iOS 10.2.1, Apple had quietly pushed software updates that reduced processor performance on iPhone 6, 6s, SE, and later 7 models when the battery degraded below a certain level. The stated reason was legitimate. Old batteries can cause unexpected shutdowns under peak processor load. Apple was solving a real problem, but they solved it without telling anyone. No announcement, no option to disable it. No notification that the phone you were holding was now running slower than the day you bought it. The timing was uncomfortable. The throttling became detectable in the months leading up to new iPhone announcements. Your old phone getting slower precisely when the new model was being promoted. Whether that was Apple's intention or a coincidence so perfectly timed it could win an award for coincidences, Apple never had to answer because they settled. Up to $500 million, approximately $92 per affected device, paid out in 2024. No admission of wrongdoing. Apple's revenue in the quarter the settlement was announced, $94 billion. The fine was a rounding error on a rounding error. What I find genuinely remarkable about Batterygate is not the throttling itself, it is how long it took to catch. A developer had to run systematic benchmarks to detect something affecting hundreds of millions of devices. The average user just thought their phone felt slow and started thinking about upgrading. Which is, come to think of it, exactly what Apple needs people to do when a new model launches. Whether intentional or not, the outcome was perfectly aligned with Apple's business model. And the lesson Apple learned is visible in iOS today. The setting that allows you to see if performance management is active exists because of BatteryGate. They disclosed it. After getting caught, the 79-pound kit to replace a $4 battery. Let's talk about the battery for a moment. The battery in the iPhone 17 Pro Max. The component most likely to fail, most likely to degrade, most likely to be the reason you consider replacing your phone after 2 years costs $4.10 in the bill of materials. $4.10 in a $1,299 device. In 2022, Apple launched the self-service repair program. The pitch? Consumers can now buy genuine Apple parts and fix their own devices. Progressive. Empowering. Then the kit arrived. 2 cases. Combined weight, 79 pounds. Height when stacked, 47 inches. The iFixit team described renting it as like renting a Boston Dynamics robot to change the oil on your car. And in March 2026, iFixit celebrated the new MacBook Neo as Apple's most repairable laptop in 14 years, with a score of 6 out of 10, 6. After 14 years of effort, that is the baseline. The repair kit is not the deepest issue. The deepest issue is parts pairing. Starting with the iPhone 12, Apple introduced digital serialization that pairs components to a specific device. Replace a screen with a genuine Apple part pulled from another iPhone, and certain features may stop working, not because the hardware is incompatible, but because the software is configured to detect and penalize unauthorized repair. Independent repair shops, the ones that have been fixing phones for decades for a fraction of Apple's prices, are systematically blocked from using salvaged parts, which is how their business model works. iFixit gave the iPhone 17 a 7 out of 10 for repairability in 2025, crediting improved battery access and modular design. Progress is real. Apple introduced Repair Assistant software to allow calibration after independent repairs, partly in response to the Oregon Right to Repair Act of 2024. But outside the EU and Oregon, the old barriers largely remain, and the rental kit still weighs 79 pounds. Because for Apple, a consumer who repairs their device is a consumer who is not buying a new one, and a consumer buying a new one is worth considerably more than the cost of a 79-pound kit. The green bubble is not a bug. In 2021, during the Epic Games antitrust litigation, internal Apple emails were made public. An executive was asked why Apple did not improve iMessage compatibility with Android. The response? Fixing it would hurt us more than help us. Another email noted that the green bubble, the color that appears in iMessage when you text someone on Android, functioned as a social retention mechanism. Young iPhone users, specifically, felt social pressure not to be the person with a green bubble in the group chat. Apple knew. They maintained it intentionally. The green bubble is not a technical limitation. SMS and RCS work across platforms. It is a design decision preserved by strategy worth billions of dollars in customer retention. In 2022, Tim Cook was asked about it publicly. His response? Buy your mom an iPhone. He was joking. The strategy behind the joke is not a joke. The App Store completes the picture. Apple takes 15 to 30% of every in-app purchase on every app on iPhone. In 2024, the EU forced Apple to allow third-party app stores under the Digital Markets Act. Apple complied by introducing the core technology fee, a charge per installation that most developers argued made alternative stores economically unviable. The EU opened an investigation into whether Apple's compliance was genuine compliance or theatrical compliance. In the US market, no equivalent law exists. Apple's cut is simply the cost of reaching iPhone users. Every app price you pay includes Apple's margin. You just never see it itemized. This is what the ecosystem actually is. A system where leaving costs you airdrop, iMessage read receipts, high-quality video and group chats, Apple Watch functionality, and the social currency of a blue bubble. It is not a feature, it is a retention architecture. And every year you stay, the exit cost gets higher. The math Apple never does at the keynote. Here is the calculation. The iPhone 17 Pro Max contains approximately $408 in components based on teardown analysis published in late 2025. The A19 Pro chip, $90.85. The 5G modem, $90. The camera module, $80. The display, $80. The titanium enclosure, $20.79. The battery, $4.10. Storage and memory, $42.39. Total, $408. It sells for $1,299. That is an $891 gap. Now, and I want to be precise here because this matters, that gap is not pure profit. Apple spent over $31 billion on R&D in fiscal 2025, designing the A19 Pro to the point where TSMC's CEO called Apple the most advanced customer in the world. Takes years and genuine billions. Running 500 Apple stores globally costs roughly $18 billion per year. Software development, logistics, Apple Care, customer support, real costs, all of them. But here is what the gap does include and what no one at Apple will put in a press release. It includes the brand premium that makes a $408 phone worth $1,299 in the buyer's mind. It includes the ecosystem lock-in that makes leaving feel like financial loss. It includes the App Store margin baked into every app price you have ever paid. It includes the services infrastructure that turns a flat smartphone market into $100 billion in annual subscription revenue. And it includes the fact that a $4.10 battery requires a 79-pound kit and Apple software authorization to replace. Apple's overall gross margin was 46.9% in fiscal 2025, a record. Their services margin was 75.7%. The company made $93 billion in net income. These numbers are not a scandal. They are a business model, an extraordinarily successful one. The scandal, if there is one, is the distance between what Apple says and what Apple does. The highest standards of labor conduct announced the day after 6 months of documented violations. The Consumer Empowerment Program delivered in a 79-pound box. The commitment to privacy from the company that built a retention system around a bubble color. The innovation that changes everything, assembled in the same factory as its biggest competitor's phone. The iPhone is a genuinely excellent product, I believe that. The $408 in components makes something real and impressive. The question is only what the other $891 is paying for. Some of it is engineering, some of it is story. And now you know which is which. Now, here is what honest actually looks like in this industry. The companies building phones like they mean it. The watch industry equivalent of Rolex, the brand that actually manufactures everything it sells, charges accordingly, and holds its value because the product justifies the price, exists in smartphones. It is just not who most people think of first. Google Pixel. Not because Google is a saint, their advertising business is its own ethical conversation, and we could do an entire video on it. But because on the specific question of hardware-software integration, Google does something Apple only talks about. Google writes Android. Google designs the Tensor chip. Google develops the computational photography software. Wait, when you buy a Pixel 9a at $499, the team that built the phone built the OS it runs on, built the chip it runs on, and built the camera processing stack. The hardware and software were designed by the same people for the same device. That is the definition of vertical integration that produces real results. DxOMark ranked the Pixel 9 first in the premium smartphone camera category globally, $799, beating devices at $999 and above. The Pixel 9a at $499 delivered in independent testing the same exposure accuracy, dynamic range, and color reproduction as the more expensive Pixel 9. Google guarantees 7 years of OS and security updates. A Pixel 9a bought today gets patches until 2032. Every iPhone from the same era will be a supported device for fewer years. That is a verifiable, concrete commitment that affects the real lifespan of the device you own. Framework is building laptops, not phones yet, on the opposite design philosophy from Apple. Every component user replaceable with a single screwdriver. Parts sold directly to consumers. Repair manuals published openly. iFixit gave them a 10 out of 10, while Apple's best MacBook in 14 years just scored 6. Framework exists because enough people were angry enough about 79-pound repair kits and $4 batteries requiring Apple authorization to fund something different. They are a small company. They have not proven long-term viability at scale, but they have proven that the choices Apple makes are choices, not engineering requirements. Fairphone has been making smartphones designed to last 10 years. Modular, replaceable batteries, published supply chain transparency down to the mineral level. They know where their cobalt comes from. Apple's supply chain covers 43 countries and hundreds of suppliers. Both are imperfect. But the gap between publishing your mineral sourcing and settling labor violation reports with the same press release every 3 years is a gap worth measuring. None of these companies are perfect, but they demonstrate the thing that matters most. The decisions Apple makes are decisions. The green bubble, the 79-pound kit, the $4 battery that costs $99 to replace through Apple, the labor conditions at Foxconn, none of these are engineering requirements. They are choices made by a company with $93 billion in annual net income and no meaningful pressure to make different ones. Until enough people make different choices, too. The Swiss watch industry corrupted a label that meant craftsmanship into a cost calculation that allowed 40% foreign manufacturing while charging for 100% Swiss heritage. Apple took 6 words, designed by Apple in California, and built an $891 gap between what they imply and what they disclose. Both industries are selling you something real. Both are also selling you something that exists entirely in the story. And in both cases, the moment you understand the gap, you cannot unknow it. Tell me in the comments, does knowing this change anything for you? Or is the product good enough that the system around it is an acceptable price of admission? That is the honest question, and I genuinely want to know your answer.